Hello, and welcome to today's installment of Tales and Tales, a summer reading program brought to you by the Alabama Public Library Service and the Hale County Library. My name is Ian Crawford, and today I'm excited to read to you a section from Chapter 10, The Pyncheon Garden, from Nathaniel Hawthorne's House of the Seven Gables. This selection will bring to mind great pleasure and memories for anybody who's fond of seeing chickens and barnyard fowl playing and having adventures in their yard, as a great number of our neighbors and friends here in Hale County certainly will recall. One of the available means of amusement, of which Phoebe made the most in Clifford's behalf, was that feathered society, the hens, a breed of which, as we have already said, was an immemorial heirloom of the Pyncheon family. In compliance with the whim of Clifford, as it troubled him to see them in confinement, they had been set at liberty, and now roamed at will about the garden, doing some little mischief, but hindered from escape by buildings on three sides, and the difficult peaks of a wooden fence on the other. They spent much of their abundant leisure on the margins of Mall's Well, which was haunted by a kind of snail, evidently a tidbit to their palates, and the brackish water itself, however nauseous to the rest of the world, was so greatly esteemed by these fowls that they might be seen tasting, turning up their heads, and smacking their bills, with precisely the air of wine-bibbers round a probationary cask. Their generally quiet, yet often brisk and evidently diversified talk, one to another, or sometimes in soliloquy, as they scratched worms out of the rich black soil, or pecked at such plants as suited their taste, had such a domestic tone that it was almost a wonder why you would not establish a regular exchange of ideas about household matters, human and gallinaceous. All hens are well worth studying, for the piquancy and rich variety of their manners, but by no possibility can there have been other fowls and of such odd appearance and deportment as these ancestral ones. They probably embodied the traditionary peculiarities of their whole line of progenitors, derived through an unbroken succession of eggs, or else this individual Chanticleer and his two wives had grown to be humorists, and a little crack-brained withal, on account of their solitary way of life, and out of sympathy for Hepzibah, their lady patroness. Queerly indeed they looked. Chanticleer himself, although stalking about on two stilt-like legs, with the dignity of an interminable descent in all his gestures, was hardly bigger than an ordinary partridge. His two wives were about the size of quails, and as for the one chicken, it looked small enough to be still in the egg, and at the same time sufficiently old, withered, wizened, and experienced, to have been the founder of the antiquated race. Instead of being the youngest of the family, it seemed to have aggregated itself to the ages, not only of these living specimens of the breed, but of all its forefathers and foremothers, whose united excellencies and oddities were squeezed into its one little body. Its mother evidently regarded it as the one chicken of the world, and as necessary, in fact, to the world's continuance, or, at any rate, to the equilibrium of the present system of affairs, whether in church or state. No lesser sense of the infant fowl's importance could have been justified, even in the mother's eyes, the perseverance with which she watched over its safety, ruffling her small person to twice its proper size, and flying in everybody's face who so much as looked towards her hopeful progeny. No lower estimate could have vindicated her indefatigable zeal with which she scratched, and her unscrupulousness in digging up the choicest flower or vegetable for the sake of the fat earthworm at its root. Her nervous cluck when the chicken happened to be hidden in the long grass or under the squash leaves, her gentle croak of satisfaction, while sure of it beneath her wing, her note of ill-conceived fear and obstreperous defiance when she saw her arch-enemy, a neighbor's cat, on the top of a high fence, or one or other of these sounds was to be heard at almost every moment of the day. By degrees, the observer came to feel nearly as much interest in the chickens of this illustrious race as in the mother hen. Phoebe, after getting well acquainted with the old hen, was sometimes permitted to take the chicken in her hand, which was quite capable of grasping its cubic inch or two of body, while she curiously examined its hereditary marks, the peculiar speckle of its plumage, the funny tuft on its head, the knob on each of its legs. The little biped, which she insisted, kept giving her a sagacious wink. The daguerreotypist once whispered her that these marks betokened the oddities of the Pyncheon family, and the chicken itself was a symbol of the life of the old house, embodied its interpretation. Likewise, although an unintelligible one, as clues generally are, it was a feathered riddle, a mystery hatched out of an egg, and just as mysterious as if the egg had been Adel. The second of Chanticleer's two wives, ever since Phoebe's arrival, had been in a state of heavy despondency, caused, as it afterwards appeared, by her inability to lay an egg. One day, however, by her self important gait, the sideways turn of her head, the cock of her eye, as she pried into one and another nook of the garden, croaking to herself all the while, with inexpressible complacency, it was made evident that this identical hen, much as mankind undervalued her, carried something about her person, the worth of which was not to be estimated in either gold or precious stones. Shortly after, there was a prodigious cackling and congratulation of Chanticleer and all his family, including the wizened chicken, who appeared to understand the matter quite as well as did his sire, his mother, or his aunt. That afternoon, Phoebe found a diminutive egg, not in the regular nest, it was far too precious to be trusted there, but cunningly hidden under the currant bushes on some dry stalks of last year's grass. Hepzibah, on learning the fact, took possession of the egg and appropriated it to Clifford's breakfast, on account of a certain delicacy of flavor for which, as she affirmed, these eggs had always been famous. Thus unscrupulously did the old gentlewoman sacrifice the continuance, perhaps, of an ancient feathered race, with no better end than to supply her brother with a dainty that hardly filled the bowl of a teaspoon. It must have been in reference to this outrage that Chanticleer, the next day, accompanied by his bereaved mother of the egg, took the post in front of Phoebe and Clifford, and delivered himself of a harangue that might have proved as long as his own pedigree, but fit for merriment on Phoebe's part. Hereupon the offended fowl stalked away in his long stilts, and utterly withdrew his notice from Phoebe and the rest of human nature, until she made her peace with an offering of spice cake, which, next to the snails, was a delicacy most in favor with his aristocratic taste.